Hello, I'm Nigel Sarbutts, founder of Structured Mediation, here with another episode in the PRCA podcast series, Productivity in PR, where I talk to a number of practitioners, both in-house and agency side, around how they are responding to the ever-present and some increasing pressure from clients, be they internal clients for in-house departments or external clients for agencies, to do more with less. I'm joined today by Carolyn Bowick, who I will ask to introduce herself and her background shortly. But I'll start with the kind of provocation that I'm talking, or I've started with everybody, to say that from my perspective, from the point of a mediation, which is where I come at this from, is that the biggest barnacle on the boat is not necessarily want of better processes or better tools or another piece of software to increase productivity, but to reduce friction between people. And the idea that you kind of can't Trello your way to happiness. But I'm throwing that out to Carolyn to respond to and give her thoughts to. But I'll first start by asking Carolyn to introduce herself, her background, and the kind of work she does and how she's arrived at the thoughts that she has for us today. Carolyn, tell us who you are.
Thank you, Nigel. I'm Carolyn Bowick. I have more than 20 years marketing, communications, PR experience, working across a wide range of sectors in both the UK and internationally. Most recently, I am currently working with a GovTech provider called FreeBalance, and we work in lots and lots of very, very interesting markets around the world, helping governments to better serve their citizens, reduce corruption, improve transparency. Alongside that, I also run my own consultancy, so I wear a couple of different hats. I also sit on the CIPR Professional Standards panel. So I'm coming at this from a number of different angles, I think. And the second part of your question there, how have I arrived at my thoughts? Well, I think probably the easiest way to come at this is you posed this question of, is it about people? I could say yes, and we could just stop the podcast there. But actually, I think it would probably be more helpful, perhaps, if I shared some of my thinking. And that's really been driven by my experience in developing marketing and PR strategy, in working in big organizations and really small organizations, and in managing teams. And I suppose I'm going to talk a little bit from that experience, really what I found helpful in tackling this big question about productivity.
Okay, right. So doing more with less, a constant refrain and accelerating all the time. So how are the teams that you work with responding to that?
I think more with less is a really interesting thing. I can actually really vividly remember the first time I heard that phrase used. And it was probably about 10 years ago. It may have been used long before that, but that was the first time I remember hearing somebody say it. And I was kind of like, wow, this is this kind of really new dynamic thing that people are talking about. But actually more as I understood it, as a head of marketing and communications, the sort of real reality, I suppose, of that fancy new term that I hadn't heard before started to come through. And I think one of the things that is important for me around doing more with less is actually to reflect on, this is not a PR problem. This is an everybody problem. Everyone, I think, is being asked to do more with less. But there are certain places within an organization, I suppose, where that may be felt more, and perhaps certain roles or levels of role where that may be felt more. I think one of the things that really struck me when you first started to talk about this, Nigel, was around what actually is productivity. And I went and looked it up. I asked Mr. Google, and Mr. Google said, I paraphrase, it's the idea of an equation where you measure how many things you put into the machine and how many things that comes out at the other end.
Yeah.
So this very scientific measure of being able to forecast an effort to deliver an output. But the problem is that PR is a creative process.
Mm.
And I think it's very difficult to measure how many things you put into the machine to generate things that come out the other end. And I think that's going to be a really, really thorny problem that we are going to get into today, about actually what are we doing to acknowledge that problem? Or are we plastering over the cracks and hoping nobody notices?
Okay. And are you talking about how the recipients of those things, the clients, how they value those things versus how the producer, the agency team or the client team are valuing what they do, and there's a mismatch there?
I think it's both. So I think it's also compounded by the idea that for many businesses, we've actually moved on from outputs to outcomes.
Yeah.
So I think many clients, whether it's an agency team or an in-house team, are actually coming to PR people now and saying, I want you to deliver me an outcome. And that clouds the picture even further, because it's very difficult to say, well, actually, yes, you know, if you give me X amount of pounds, or I set aside X amount of hours, and I, you know, will therefore generate X amount of press releases and interviews, and that will deliver whatever outcome it is you're looking for. I think there is still a misalignment between what the client believes is possible and the reality of that process along the way. And I think there are perhaps some dubious professionals who have not helped with that previously, who have guaranteed these outcomes. And it leaves the more pragmatic, honest, professional, choose your term, of us coming along behind them to say, well, actually, that's not exactly how it works. And we want to work with you and understand what it is you're trying to deliver. And we want to help you on that journey to these outcomes. But for us to guarantee those outcomes for you is incredibly difficult.
Okay. And where does the responsibility lie for the honest broker? You know, who is that honest broker in that relationship between the buyer of services who has thought, well, you know, I can get this much value for this much expenditure, and being told, yes, you can have that, and we can do it for less even, or, you know, you can have more outcomes for the same amount of money, and that dose of reality that you're talking about. How does that conversation take place?
I think in some ways it's easier in an in-house context, because generally there's not money being exchanged. There's absolutely effort and hours and, you know, people time and all these things. But generally, unless you've got some fancy chargeback model, you're not exchanging money. So I think it's sometimes easier to have that conversation in-house.
But you are competing for resources. You know, you're competing for resources and time with other functions of the business.
And I think this takes us back round to your original point around friction and people. And for me, this in an in-house context, this is where this really comes to the fore, is actually the friction. There can be friction within teams. There can be people who maybe don't work that well together. It's perfectly normal, I think, particularly in a bigger team, to get to a point where, you know, there's always a bit of, they're not working as hard as me, that kind of chat. So you get that friction within teams. But actually, for me, the bigger challenge is in that internal client relationship, where you have someone who could be very senior in the organization coming to you asking for support with PR and comms, and you're having to broker that conversation that says, I understand what you're asking for, but either I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to help you, but perhaps not in the way you have laid out.
So it's an issue of leadership, you think?
I think it can be an issue of a lack of strategic alignment. So where I've seen this happen in the past, it's not always because there's a leadership problem, certainly not right at the top. It can be because there's an organizational strategy that maybe not everybody's bought into in quite the same way. And the challenge that I've had in a number of the roles that I've been in is actually to sit with those internal clients, perhaps very senior level, and actually help them understand where I'm coming from, make them feel heard.
Yeah.
And actually negotiate through that discussion to a point where everybody feels like they're getting something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not what they originally asked for, but they're getting something in that dynamic and in that relationship.
Okay. And what about translating that internally within the team? Because you've described a situation where you kind of win that argument. You've made the case and they've gone, okay, Carolyn, yeah, I get it. We need to give you more resources or adjust our expectations. You don't always win those. You can't, So when the client, again, that internal client says to you, okay, I've heard what you've got to say. Yes, you make good arguments, but I still need you to do the thing, and I can't give you any more money. And actually, in actual fact, our budget for your activities has just been reduced by 10%. How then do you translate that into the team when you have to go back and go, just had a difficult meeting, guys. The more for less is real, and
Yeah.
I'm responding to those pressures.
I think the way that I've dealt with it in the past is you're absolutely right. There are sometimes you have to say, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
This is not an argument I'm going to win. I'm going to, give you this part of it that you've asked for, because that's how we're going to compromise and negotiate our way out of this discussion.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's worth it, I would argue. So I've done that. Absolutely. I've done that when I've been relatively new into post, where I've thought, this is a quick win for the team. Let's get this person on board early. And it's actually bought us a lot more understanding and a lot more positive engagement moving forward from that. But sometimes, it doesn't work like that. And actually there's a stakeholder management aspect to this and taking that back into the team. And as I suppose as a leader of a department or the head of a function, that to me means going back and actually looking, well, what have we got on the books? What do we do? How do we create space to do that? What can we push out? What can we move? And sometimes, you're reallocating people. Sometimes I'm taking it on myself, even though, I'm maybe thinking this is not exactly what I thought I was going to be doing, trying to move into that space. And sometimes I've had to have really difficult conversations where actually, I've laid out and said, if we do everything that is required, we're still going to be here in 2028. How are we actually going to do this? We need to have a serious conversation, but to do that you need to have that presence in those discussions where the decisions are made. And I think that's where it's challenging for a lot of people, is they might be in that sort of head of function role, but they're not at the discussion at the table where those discussions are made. But I think for me, what's been really, really helpful is to really understand what the function does. So what is it we actually do? What kind of work are we doing at the moment? What are people involved in? How long is it roughly taking? Those kinds of questions, to know the business so that you can have those kinds of arguments.
Yeah. Okay. Which takes you back to what people value. And if what you do, if what the team produces is not valued by the buyer, the senior manager who's the budget holder, then it's a bit of a waste of time because you're going to be busy fools. And in the notes you sent me, you said productivity tools don't increase productivity themselves. They can improve visibility. Can you develop that thought?
Yeah. So I think that the idea that you suddenly start putting all of your work into a Trello or a Monday or whatever tool you're using, and suddenly everyone will suddenly be working faster. For me, it's just insanity. And in fact, actually, to use these tools properly, you're looking at training people, you're looking at bedding things in, you're looking at getting things wrong, the setup of it. So it becomes a whole enterprise in itself. But where I do think they can help is to provide full visibility of everything that's happening in your team. So whether you're a team of one or a team of 40, You have everything in one place. And I found that very, very powerful. So when you go into a difficult meeting, as I have done, and somebody's going, but I've asked you for this, and why can't I have that? It's actually quite a helpful tool to go, can we just take a minute so that I can just show you what the team's working on just now? Because I think there's, we're all human, right? And there's a real, we can be quite quick to go, if I don't physically see you, you're not doing it.
Yeah.
You're just sitting there with your feet on the desk eating bonbons. So I think where these tools are helpful is being able to show there's 272 requests that have come in the last week.
Yeah.
That's us working through them. So if you haven't heard back from us, it's not because we don't like you. It's because you were number 230 that came in. We're getting to you. And I think that's where they can be really, really powerful. There's a whole other piece about, the more you use some of these tools, and if the tool is sophisticated enough, you can start to get to a point where you can loosely forecast a blog post is going to take us that long to write. A press release usually takes us that long to write. Photo shoot we can normally have done. So with enough data, they can be useful for that. But even just from a visibility perspective, I think they can be very, very powerful. But I think we just need to be careful that, it's not one of these things where you buy the tool and all is fixed.
Yeah, good things happen. And when you've gone back into teams and you've said, I didn't quite get the outcome I wanted from the negotiation with the budget holder, we are under pressure here. What are the signs that you see in teams where, that people will kind of go, okay, shoulder to the wheel, let's, we have to do more, we do more with less. Times are tough. Eventually people do snap though. And, what are the signs that you see when things are getting beyond just a bad day at the office or, a bad stretch?
And I think this is the challenge.
Go on, sorry.
Right. I think this is a challenge with more with less, right? So I said the first time I heard this was 10 years ago. We cannot do more with less for 10 years.
Yeah.
And keep continuing to do more with less. There comes a point where you can't wring any more out.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that concerns me. But in terms of some of those signs, I think knowing your team is really important, because those signs are different in lots of different people. I've worked with people who are actually very open and will say, do you know, I'm really struggling actually. I don't know, what should I do? Can you help me figure out how I tackle this? Because I've got all these things to do. And that can be a really helpful conversation for you as a manager to understand as well. But then there's a lot of people who won't say a word. And, a wall will go up and you'll think they're fine until something happens. And so I think communication between a manager and the people in their team has to be very important there. And it's one of those situations as well. I know there's a lot of discussion about managers being vulnerable or authentic, or there's a lot of words being used as to what's the best way to do it. But I actually think there is a place for saying, do you know what, guys, I'm really struggling with this as well.
Yeah.
Let's take a breath, and then can we come together and figure out what are some of the potential solutions, and can you tell me what would help you, so that we can try and find a way through this.
And how do you advise someone who reports to you but is themselves a manager, so a middle manager role, who believes that the way to respond to that stress is not to appear vulnerable or to say, I'm struggling myself, but to kind of be the person who goes and cracks the whip and says, I don't care, everyone's working till 8 p.m. tonight because I say so. I mean, how do you work with someone like that who responds to that stress by magnifying the stress to other people, to who becomes the as I say, that the person who cracks the whip rather than tries to find consensus and a way through?
I think the challenge with these things is that there's actually a time and a place for lots of different behaviours. So if you know your team well enough, actually sometimes a bit of cracking the whip might be the right thing to do. because they might need that. Let's go, guys, you know. But if it's this, you know, that specific situation that you're talking about where you have someone who their stress becomes very internal and it's, you know, it's not a supportive environment that perhaps they're encouraging. I think for me, that's just a conversation and maybe just a reminder of we're all different. And that might be the way that you motivate yourself.
Yeah.
To, you know, crack the whip yourself, but actually, you know, Nigel or Carolyn, and you know that that's actually not going to work. So have you thought about how to get the reaction and the response that you want? And I think the other thing is to have these conversations not in a time of crisis. You know, we always talk in crisis comms about don't wait till it's a crisis to write your crisis plan. And this is the similar kind of idea. I've long talked about, you know, you build the relationships before you meet them.
Thank you.
Whether that's with your internal client, whether it's within your teams, you build really important relationships so that when you are in these situations,
thank you for your time. And I hope that you'll be looking out for
each other and you're not
other episodes
to take
in this
someone aside
Spark
and have a difficult
podcast series with the PRCA on
them.
productivity and PR.
And I think
so with that, I'll thank
generally
you and,
people are open to, can you stay till 8 o'clock tonight? We've got to get this over the line. But again, it's when it becomes, it's every night at 8 o'clock or every week's a stressful week. It's not sustainable.
Okay. And what are the kind of signs you see in yourself when you think, you know, I'm not being the authentic leader that I should be? Because, you know, we all have our good days or our bad days. You know, you are a very competent person. I know that for sure, and you know, I'm sure you are, and you come across as that. But you know, there must be times when you thought, you know, I really handled that, you know, like a lemon. You know, I've just transferred my stress onto somebody else. My problem has become their problem. And what are the signs that you see in yourself? What are the things that you think when you catch yourself and go, oh no, that was the wrong way to handle that?
I think everybody has those moments, and if you don't, then I would encourage you to really think about whether you do and you just aren't noticing them. But I think, you know, years and years ago, right, the very start of my career as a manager, as a people manager, I had a new boss who had came in, and I was very nervous about this new manager coming in to manage me. And I remember the first performance review I had with her, which happened to be very early in her time being my manager. And at the end of the performance review, she said to me, do you have any feedback for me? No manager had ever asked that of me before. You know, from my perspective, a performance review was very much a one-way relationship. They told me how good or bad I had been, and I nodded and smiled. And ever since that point, I have made a point of asking the same question. So not only at, you know, the point of a performance review, but in regular one-to-ones, not necessarily every time, but at least kind of once a quarter. You know, do you have any feedback for me? And I think what's been really powerful from that perspective for me was people have shared things with me that I didn't understand about myself. So somebody said to me, when you get stressed, sometimes it's like the car window going up. And the person you were an hour before, chatty, you know, you suddenly just goes, and we can see it. And I find that such powerful feedback, because now I'm really aware of when I do that. And I've actually got this visual thing of, oh, here's the car window starting to go up. And therefore, my behavior is starting to change. I'm maybe becoming detached. And actually, that's a sign that stress levels are elevating, and I need to deal with that myself rather than to start to affect the conversation that perhaps I'm having in the moment or the relationship that I have with that person. So, you know, I would really strongly encourage anybody to make sure you're having, you know, ask people you trust. Don't necessarily, you know, stick a sign up in the canteen. Ask people that you trust.
Yeah.
Can you give me feedback? Let me know. That was a really difficult board meeting we were just in.
Mm.
How do you think I did? Was there anything I could do differently?
Yeah.
And take that feedback on board.
Okay. That's brilliant. As we're starting to run out of time a little bit on the recording and the time we have available, are there any, I don't want to say top tips for productivity, unless you have, 3 things to do today, listicle type thing. But, what are the, if you could sit somebody down who is struggling with that pressure, is hearing that we need to do more for less, maybe for the first time, or maybe the first time where they have to respond, they have to come back with the plan for how to respond to that challenge. What would be the things that you would say to, Carolyn of a few years ago when you first had said, okay, I've had that difficult meeting. It's up to me now to negotiate my way out of that and to communicate effectively to my team about how we respond to that.
I think the first thing would be to understand what your organization's strategy is.
Yeah.
Because if you and your team are responding to that strategy, it's very difficult to argue why you should stop doing that and go and do this other thing.
Yeah.
It's not impossible, it's happened. But that strategic alignment, I think, is one of the key things to protecting your team from what I would call busy work and noise, I suppose, in the system. So understand that. Even if it's not forthcoming to you, ask, what's our organizational strategy? What's the business targets? What's the goal? And then align your work to that and be ready to explain why you're making the choices that you're making.
And can I just come in there? Is that because sometimes the person saying do more for less has forgotten their own? They themselves have forgotten the strategy, because the strategy was set not necessarily in the good times, but out of crisis. And maybe they've forgotten what they signed up to themselves.
Yeah.
And they're, you are the recipient of stress and crisis and the moment.
I think either because they've forgotten, or perhaps because they're trying to get you to do a thing which is ultimately a nice to have.
Yeah.
And we can all have nice to haves.
Yeah.
And actually, on that, I firmly believe that comms people should have nice to haves, because they're some of the best projects to work on. So those are the things that get you through the difficult days, right? But we can't always do the nice to have. Sometimes we have to do the things that are strategically significant.
Yeah.
And I think so sometimes they can forget what they've signed up for in another area of the business, or perhaps it's just they're being told there's more with less.
Yeah.
This looks like a thing that could maybe be passed off onto the comms function, and then they can get on with it and I don't have to. So it's being kind of alert to that, I suppose, as well, and thinking in those terms of what can we pick up as a nice to have, and what ultimately are we going to have to say, no, sorry, it's not strategically kind of aligns with what we're wanting to do. So that's probably the first thing. And then the second thing I would say is really about understanding who your stakeholders are. And as I said, building those relationships in a time of calm rather than in a time of stress would be really important. Put yourself out there. Volunteer for things. Volunteer to be in rooms that nobody asked you to be in. The worst they're going to say is no. It's usually my advice to people. And the things that you can pick up when you're in those rooms can be really powerful, that you can then take forward in your thinking and your planning. Yeah. And then I think the last thing is, where you can, and I know it's really difficult, try and have even a tiny amount of time just to be creative. Yeah. I think one of the big dangers I think we have as a profession is that we are all glued to a laptop or a phone. And sometimes, you need to go for a walk around the block, or you need to listen to a really good song, or you need to go to an art gallery and look at a painting that you don't like for 15 minutes. Just something that takes you out of.
Like.
Yeah, it was easy to look at a painting you like. Look at something that you don't like and actually think about, why don't I like this, but what's gone into it? Get those kind of creative processes flowing.
Yeah.
It can be 15 to 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be 2 days. Yeah. But the day we lose the creativity is the day that AI takes over our profession and it's dead, and we might as well give up. Because that's the bit that we bring to this. And I think that's the bit that's really powerful.
Love it. I love that. And also I love the idea that looking at a painting you don't like is friction. It's putting sand in the machine a little bit. So we started with friction, we've ended with friction. So that's been really useful, very illuminating, Karen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank
And
you.
thanks for joining us. Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Bye.